More often than not, when we're working with customers on their security, their access, their identity, one of the challenges is not so much the issues itself, but more about the changes that are needed in order to implement better security. And I'm not talking about changes within a system or application, I'm talking about the human side. And it's the case more often than not that the more senior the employee, the more access that they have, and the more difficult conversation it is to talk about taking some of that access away. Now, in particular, I'm referencing segregation of duties, and that is a very common problem among executives who have a lot of power over financial transactions and therefore a lot of impact over financial reporting. So, for example, an executive might be able to help or assist in the creation or management of suppliers and may also be involved in paying suppliers as well. Now, the risk there is that if that were me, I could create myself as a supplier and pay myself, and those types of stories are always in the press. But in this video, I'm going to focus on the behavioural side. And from my experience, having worked with a lot of customers, it is very challenging to sit down to someone and say, hey, we need to change your access because of the risk of fraud or error. Now, of course, in that example, people can take that very personally. What do you mean? I haven't committed fraud. My transactions are fantastic. There is the opportunity for people to get really offended by these types of conversations. And when it comes to change, there's usually two issues. Resistance and denial. Resistance is we don't need to change this process, it works perfectly fine. Or there is denial. There is no problem. Why are we making this a problem? There's no problem here, let's move on. But there's also this third issue, which is offence, being offended by the need for change, that somehow change is happening because of something that we have done, or I have done, or you have done. So the question is, how do you go about getting people to change without getting offended, without resistance, without denying that there is a problem? Now, a lot of people argue that in these examples, the change is necessary and it's stamped, it's concrete, it has to happen. And so just tell people and they can get on with it. But that just leads to more resentment and problems down the road, people getting dissatisfied, morale going down, that kind of thing. So how do you get people on board with security changes? One of the things that we found has really helped is to talk to people, particularly those who have a lot of responsibility, to say, hey, we appreciate you have a lot of responsibility, you have a lot on your plate. Why don't we try and focus on the things that really make a difference and give some of the other things to someone else or to another department? So in my example about suppliers, as an individual, I might be heavily involved in the management of suppliers, and therefore I might be more lenient, shall we say, or open to losing paying suppliers, and therefore that should go to someone else. So in these conversations, rather than coming in with an accusational type tone or an accusation-led approach to saying, hey, you have too much access and you're a risk, is trying to think about how you can help that individual by taking things off their plate and giving it to someone else, or again to another department. The other approach is to get individuals bought into the why. Why are we doing this? Why do we need to make these changes? And more often than not, the changes that need to be made won't just apply to one person. It's more than likely that it's a whole series of processes, a whole series of segregation of duty issues, or users just having too much access that needs to be revoked. And so it's important to get people on board with why that is happening. And there is more than enough evidence in the press that will show these issues where employees have too much access and they've got up to no good, or in other cases where errors have been committed through no perhaps fault of the employee, but just having too much access again led to some kind of issue in a transaction. Now that's a weaker approach to take because it still has an undertone of we need to remove your access because you're a risk, but it's also getting people to see why we're doing it and perhaps mentioning the fact that they are not alone in needing their responsibilities changed. So in summary, we want to get away from making change happen without suspicion or accusation, without making people feel uneasy that somehow they are in a target, a line of sight for being a problem or even committing a crime. And what we want to do is focus on the behavioural side, getting on their side of the table to say, hey, change is necessary, here is why, but how can we make your role better? How can we improve the tasks that you have to administer on a day-to-day basis and make your job easier? At the same time, satisfying those who are telling us, hey, we need to change our access.